Okay, we are back. The first artist we are going to be focusing on is James Rosenquist. He is the most political, perhaps, or the most critical of society of all the pop artists, from what I can tell. And this is the work that we're going to be focusing on. It's called President Elect from 1960 to 61. It is a very large work, as you can see, partially because he was, prior to being an artist, a billboard painter. And his work is largely based on that experience. He's supposed to have learned to paint um, as he was a billboard painter. He did go to art school and all that, but ultimately his pop art works really reflect his training as a billboard artist. And this is a very interesting work because it's also a triptych, and then it also has three subjects, you could say, or three motifs that show up. One of them is a very, very large face of President Kennedy, or at the time he was actually the candidate when he was painting this. Then we have a cake that Rosenquist himself has said is stale, perhaps because it's gray, right? It's doesn't look stale necessarily, at least not in the ad, but in the painting, because he chooses to take away the color, it has this mushy, sort of, not necessarily tasty looking appearance. And then the car, which is a Chevrolet, which was a very, very famous and popular and accessible, affordable, all things considered, kind of car in this time, right? So here you can see the three ads or the three images that Rosenquist used in order to make the work. He actually has them, and they were kind of pasted or glued together with tape. And he simply juxtaposed them. And then he, of course, did make changes and all that. But nevertheless, they are clearly the inspiration. And he's using advertisement and package design in order to create his works. Now, what would be the meaning of this work is a good question. Is he criticizing Kennedy? Is he saying that Kennedy will give us this kind of life in which there are cars and cakes? Is he, you know, being critical? This is a question that with pop art we often have, that is not necessarily easy to answer because the images tend to be very optimistic looking and bright and colorful and large and well defined. And but many times there is a darker message, perhaps, right? Which is again not really hidden, but almost like looming, more than being hidden. It's almost like you say, oh yeah, I can see that the optimism, it's a bright image, it's very clean, very much like the advertisement of the time. But then again, there's something about putting it on canvas and changing the proportions and juxtaposing it that changes the meaning. And here we can see that, perhaps, it occurs to me in this weird thing, the finger that comes out of his eye, right? And then the hand comes out of his chin. So it's almost like saying, these are related, but this is a sort of monstrous creature now. And from there we have the car. All right. As a matter of fact, Rosenquist did make some statements about how he thought that, he's reflecting on the fact that this is not a lie necessarily, but a sort of trickery, right? What advertisement does. We can see that indeed he is using directly the posters that Kennedy had created or had created for himself in his presidential campaign, in which, of course, he looks very smiling and happy, optimistic. Right? It's an image of the type of portraiture that we are now very familiar with, because these are all the photographs that we want to make of ourselves. But again, it is almost fake, right? There is a certain, not fakeness to it, but an exaggeration of the optimism, of the positivity, you could say. And of course, that's what one expects of a politician, who would vote for someone who is not smiling. But on the other hand, it's It's a little bit, especially for that time, right? Coming out of the Second World War with a much more moralistic tone. This is a kind of image that looks very, very fresh and very different. And so Rosenquist takes that image and combines it with the consumer goods, right? With the consumer culture that this is creating, this emphasis on things like cake, which by the way is boxed cake, and a car, right? A promise, a certain promise that will be delivered through this smile, very much like advertising. Um, so we have that. By the way, the issue of celebrity culture is very important thanks to the new, not invention, but the new reach of the TV, right? TV is something that increasingly people can afford to have at home, and this brings the candidate to their home, right? It's like when we watch TV nowadays, and it's almost like having this person talking to you, next to you, um, and that familiarity, right, that television can create is strange, because after all, the candidate is giving his speech somewhere else in the country, but he enters the space of your home. People can talk about it. The family gathers around the TV to almost be next to Kennedy, right? To be next to this person. And again, these are experiences that we are very familiar with, but at the time must have felt very strange at the beginning, at the very least. Um, we also have the ads themselves, right? So this is the reference, not the direct ad, but again, the general idea. Betty Crocker, by the way, has been around from like the late 1960s. I'm sorry, the late 1920s. It is a very, very, it's a company that's been around for quite a while, from what I have been able to find. And it is very interesting that, again, the cakes are advertised precisely based on their freshness, right? Special homemade goodness. The cake itself is like ads of food today. The close-ups to the food that show, the texture enlarged. Same idea was happening at the time. And at the time, it was very original to do it that way. So here again, the kind of taking away the color is essentially transforming the ad, right? Because here you have the representation of freshness through this yellow cake with peaches, and here it has become something really kind of borderline disgusting, right? So that whole idea is where we see the criticism, perhaps, in his work. And then cars, right? Cars are very important. They continue to be very important today. But I mean, compare our cars, which focus on not so much space but efficiency, right? And back then, that wasn't the case. The whole idea with these cars of the 1960s was that they had to be huge. They had to have comfort inside, and they were, of course, a sign of status, right? But they were also affordable, comparatively speaking. So here we have some ads of the time, and again, they demonstrate this idealized lifestyle, right? People going on a couple going on a picnic. It looks like the woman is winning the chess game, right? He looks kind of puzzled. So this is again this cool thing to do: go out in the country in your car, and here it's a different idea, because this is a very chic couple, right? And they seem to be, both of them, kind of in the middle of nowhere, right? Escaping the city, escaping perhaps the life of work, right? This is a kind of a weekend approach to your car. Nowadays, when we think about our car, we think about um, I don't know, commuting, right? It's fun to be in your car, but again, the experience of freedom is more associated with these older cars that have a lot of space, that allow you to load your car with lots of things and go away for perhaps a day, an afternoon, into the countryside, escape the life of the city, perhaps. And they reflect again a new sense of comfort. So that is the promise that Kennedy is making for us. And that is what Rosenquist is talking about. So again, we have here consumer culture, celebrity culture in the case of Kennedy, right? Advertising, and mass culture, because all of these items are intended to the masses. And the main thing is that, another aspect of this is that these objects that are again part of consumer culture, part of mass culture, popular culture, are now in the world of the fine arts, right? They have reached a status which creates a sense of sameness, right? So the work of art actually becomes kind of a banality, right? Like a banal object, similar to perhaps all these other objects that are advertised in this transient way. All right. But think about it, it's still a triptych, right? And one can think of that in a practical sense. It's actually better to paint smaller canvases than larger ones for the sake of preservation. The work will just do better over time. But at the same time, a triptych has a sort of religious connotation to it. So it's almost, again, making images that are banal, or turning images that are banal into a sort of worship image, right? A work of art that is associated with religion. All right.